going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe.
And Amy.
Review. This is our weekly show where we review the Magic stories. We are getting down to the end of it here, but we are back this week for Chapter 18 of The Gathering Storm by Django Wexler. My quick review at the top, this is one that must be read. This is not to be missed. It was very, very good. You like action, you got it. You like heartwarming moments, you got it. Pensive moments, you got it. It's just all around great. So I highly recommend it. Amy?
Yeah, I have to, if I were to compare this to anything, it definitely took me back to the twins' stories.
Oh yeah, that's good, yeah.
You know, those few stories where they really talked about the sort of dynamic between Nicol Bolas and Ugin.
Mm-hmm.
It was very similar to that. It was very good.
So yeah, if you enjoy those, you'll enjoy this, and you should definitely go read it. So yes, feel free. If you don't know where to find it, just Google The Gathering Storm. You can specifically Google Chapter 18, or just Google that story in general by Django Wexler, and you should be able to find it. Those are our quick reviews at the top, and we don't want to spoil it for you because the big action beat of this story we're not really going to be able to cover. It was just so much and so good, but we're not really going to be able to do it much justice. We'll talk about it, but we're not going to hit on all the big points, so it's definitely something you should read for yourself.
As always, yes. Please read the stories before listening to this review, because it's a review.
Right.
It's really just our opinions on what we've just read. And if you're not in the same spot that we are at the beginning of this video, where you haven't read the story, then you're not going to understand what is being talked about. So please do.
And then, of course, we would love for you to come back here and join in the conversation with us, because that's obviously the whole point.
Right.
We would love to hear comparing and contrasting opinions, both, because that's kind of how we roll. So, on to the full review itself. Actually, I lied to all of you. I apologize. Before we get on to the full review itself, Amy, you had something left over from the end of last week's story, where the betrayal of Dovin Bond was supposed to be that big surprise moment that left you on a cliffhanger and wanting to read more. And what did you have to say about that?
Yeah, I think the time between reading that story and reacting to it, and reading or beginning to read this story, that time spent to kind of mull it over made me kind of enjoy, I'll say, almost, how little of a dramatic sort of anything the end of that story was. Now, I know that in JaAR we talked about how it should have been this big dramatic story changing cliffhanger, and it couldn't be because of the fact that the other stories came out first and blah blah blah. With the time of, you know, it being next week now, I kind of like that they didn't really spend a lot of time and description on the fact that Dovin betrayed them, because we already knew it. And drawing that out would have just been drawing it out. It wouldn't have had the drama and the cliffhanger that it needed to have regardless, right? It just wouldn't have had that. So I think cutting the time a little shorter and just sort of stating it plainly and sort of just letting you see the characters' specific reactions to that, which was really the only information we as the audience did not know. I think that was actually sort of a nice, clean, and tidy way to present it.
It's a fair point.
Does that make sense?
No, yeah.
Because I think if they had gone overboard with it, like, it would have made sense to do if it hadn't been spoiled previously. Because it had been spoiled previously, it would have just been a lot of fluff that we didn't need and wasted our time.
And I was saying to Amy, because we talked about this a bit before we turned the camera on and talked to all of you, but I was saying, it's difficult for us to know because we're not told and we don't deserve to know, to be honest. But it's difficult for us to know what elements of this story, The Gathering Storm, were written, actually physically written, prior to knowing that War of the Spark Ravnica was going to be coming out before this. Right? It's very... I'm pretty confident in feeling that that the story broadly, just the shell of, like, the beginning, the middle, the end, like, what was going to happen was known well before the War of the Spark Ravnica novel came out. Again, I don't know that for certain, but I'm pretty confident in it, just based on then Wizards needing to go to an outside author, explain to them what's going on, give them backstory to read. Like, they need to have a general idea, like a shell of the story prior, plus the fact that the set itself had to be made years in advance because that's just how they do it. So I'm pretty confident that at least the shell of it existed prior to knowing when the novel was being released in relation to these emailed stories. But we don't know how much of the nuts and bolts exact version was written prior to and or post knowing that the novel was coming out first, because that could have catered to what you're talking about, where they would have been able to then do it on purpose, where they would have been able to not go so heavily into, surprise, it's Dovin's the traitor.
Right, and really just focus on them finding that information out. Because we already knew that information, and they can just then focus on, okay, what do these characters see and know and feel in the moment where they figure that out.
Right, and even showing little moments here and there of like, ooh, Rahl might have noticed something there, right? Dovin said something there, maybe Rahl noticed it. Rahl's pretty clever. Niv Mizzet himself, pretty clever. And again, Niv mentioned it in this story, and it's very true. I don't know whether I mentioned it out loud, but I definitely thought it, that it was the whole thing with Vraska taking down Isperia. The plan was twofold. It was twofold in that it got rid of Isperia, and it was Vraska being like a mole in the organization, but it also was used to distract from any signs that Dovin was a betrayer, and also put him then in the seat as the guild leader and being in control of all of that, because Isperia is now gone and there is no suspicion on him because Vraska is the one outed as the traitor.
Right.
And if they all thought there was only one.
Right. And if they all know that it's her, then there's no reason for them to suspect, pristine old Dovin, whom I love, by the way, still.
You still do.
To be a traitor and just a treacherous murderer, basically.
Yeah. No, and it's a very good point. So that leads into almost immediately to the beginning of this story, where, at the end of the last one, Niv kind of says to Rahl, like, we've been had. It was Dovin the whole time. And now they're talking. The two of them are talking about what needs to happen next.
Right.
And Niv is pretty defeated, like seems pretty upset about the fact that he was had, because he's supposed to be smarter than that. That's kind of the idea.
Yeah.
He is the fire mind, after all, 15,000 years old, as they told us multiple times in this story, but it was necessary each time. I wouldn't say it got old. I think it was 2 or 3 times that it was mentioned, and it had been mentioned previously in this novel, if you will, of all the chapters.
Well, the point was to kind of give you that context of, like, look, when there's enough moving parts in your world, it doesn't matter how clever and wise and old you are, you miss stuff.
Yeah. And or, as he mentions later on, you get complacent. Right. Because you are strong and powerful and intelligent, and so you, especially in a leadership type of role, you have the opportunity to delegate some things and or order people around. Just say, nope, you're going to do this for me from now on because I'm big and powerful and the leader and I don't have to anymore.
Right.
And that Niv Mizzet's point was, maybe I've been doing that for too long. Maybe I've gone a little soft, right? And that happens in human lives, right?
Well,
That's not something that is I can't think of the word. Unrelatable. That's the word.
Right.
It's not something that's unrelatable for us, even though this is a 15,000-year-old dragon who performs magic.
Well, and they blatantly sat there and said that he didn't remember what fear felt like. I mean, it's kind of hard for us as humans to kind of even conceive
That's fair.
of something like that.
Yeah.
And if you try to put yourself in that mindset, you basically realize that you can't even fathom what kind of a power trip this dude must be on. You know what I mean? He's been good to humans and he's been respectful and he's been wonderful, but to be that far removed from the types of things that are so normal for us in terms of like keeping us how do I say it? Keeping us from like getting too big for our britches,
Keeping us humble,
right,
if you will.
Right. Those things are kind of foreign to him.
Because he never had to deal with it.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's when they describe it that way, it's a lot easier to kind of put yourself in the mindset that like, oh yeah, like he is so just above what we can conceive of in terms of power level, to the point where maybe it's just to make Nicol Bolas look strong, because they're fighting and they're almost comparable, opponents.
Mm-hmm.
But so you know what I'm saying, like I think because Niv Mizzet is the guildmaster of the Izzet League, we kind of forget how different from humans he really is, and they really focused on those points in this story.
Yeah, and that kind of goes to the next point that I had written down. There was a legitimately kind of acute moment between Niv and Rahl in that discussion in the beginning where Niv is real with Rahl and gives him like a compliment or like praises him a little, and even you were like surprised by that. You were like, whoa, that probably shouldn't happen.
I was like, what's going on?
Well, and again, Niv is very intelligent, so Niv knows what's coming. They see...
And he was going to ask something of Rahl, and that was very important, and basically tell Rahl, like, look, I'm going to go, stall him, but I might never come back.
Mm-hmm. Not even I might never come back.
I probably will.
Right, was relatively certain of it because of the fact... I mean, he looks at him and he says, you cannot fail. He doesn't say we cannot fail. He is pretty certain he's going to fail. And Rahl knows it too. I mean, Rahl knows it in that moment, and they kind of have their goodbyes, and Rahl wishes him good luck. And I found it somewhat interesting, and there's a little nitpick that I have, and I have a bigger nitpick later, but there's a little nitpick that I have that we go from Rahl wishing Niv Mizzet good luck, Rahl wishing his Parun, his guildmaster, his leader, the I was going to say man, that is not what Niv Mizzet is, but the creature that Rahl has looked up to as a mentor, as almost to but almost to like a deity like level, right? Like it's not quite, but it almost is, right? That whole exchange earlier in the chapters where Niv Mizzet is just like, looks at Rahl and he's like, yeah, I understand about planeswalkers, I get it. And Rahl's like, oh, crap, I didn't think people were supposed to know about that. And Niv's like, yeah, but I'm not people. Like, I'm me, I get it. Like, I understand. Rahl's like, oh, but that's too much for people to understand. So, like, Rahl is even in this story, right, is being shown to have appreciation for Niv and his intelligence and have reverence for him almost in his abilities and his power. And now...
Well, and in the ways he uses his power.
Yeah. And now Raul realizing, oh, you're leaving now. Like, we failed in our goal of stopping Niv Mizzet stopping Nicol Bolas by giving Niv Mizzet the power of the Guild Pact. We were stopped twice by Nicol Bolas' treachery through Varaska and then Dovin Bond, and now it's too late. Now that last silo has been fired and misfired, and now Bolas is here, and that's the problem that we have. So, it was then immediately contrasted, though, in this story, because now we know Bolas is coming, and so you're now going to quickly hear from Varaska. And it was like 2 paragraphs of like Varaska hearing it and being nervous and the sounds and whatever. And so now we have a concern, right? And that concern is Storev looking at Varaska and saying, can I say I want to wish you good luck? Why? Who cares? Storev has been nothing in this story. Yeah. Why the hell do you have Storev wishing Varaska good luck? Oh, I know why. Because we've talked about this, and I've been upset about it, so I'm going to continue to be upset about it, but you took Varaska's actual friend in the guild and turned him on her so that you didn't have to continue the story that was previously written by better
writers.
Be careful, because we're not talking about Django Wexler here.
Nope.
The people that are employees of Wizards of the Coast being better at making these stories than the current.
Because they're writers.
Fair. I just want to be clear in what we're saying, that we're not talking about Django Wexler here.
No.
We're talking about Wizards employees. And yes, they are writers. I wasn't attempting to dismiss that they're writers. I was trying to just make it clear, in case anyone was curious. We're not talking about Django Wexler. We're talking about the current story team versus the previous story team. And yeah, just in your effort to retcon everything that they did in the lead up to this, you got rid of Mazarek and made Zedek a thing. And it could have worked if you had made Zedek a thing and then killed off either Zedek or Mazarek and had Varaska be upset about that, but given her the other one to confide in. Because then it would make sense for someone to look at her and say, good luck.
Right.
What the hell does Storev care? Why does Storev care? When in this story have we been made to believe that Storev and Varaska are close enough that Storev would look at Varaska and say, good luck? Who gives a damn? There's been no benefit whatsoever to that. But because you wrote off Mazarek as a traitor,
right,
and
then
killed off Zedek,
her other friend.
Sure. And that's totally comparable to Raul and Niv Mizzet, right. that you had to put them back to back. You didn't show Kaya at all. Why bother showing Varaska? There was no point. And again, not Django Wexler's fault. The way that it was written, if Storev had been a character that was friendly with Varaska, that would have actually been a pretty cool moment. Because Varaska's whole point was, yeah, I do need luck. We all need luck. Like, that's a cool line. That's somewhat cliched, but it works in this instance.
But
it's necessary.
Right.
Except that you would say that, or you would have that conversation with someone who you care about.
Right.
And who we as readers should care about caring about Varaska.
Right.
And that's not a thing.
Nope.
If you disagreed, please let me know. Like, if you really were like, no, I got that Storev and Varaska were close, let me know where. Because I would love to be reminded of spots, but I don't know that I don't know that any of the beats with Storev in them were important enough for us to have even mentioned Storev at all in any of the JaARs before now, except in passing. And that should be indicative enough of the fact that Storev has not been an impactful member of this story enough to have that be the character who is wishing Varaska luck when Nicol Bolas shows up on Ravnica. That big moment that is supposed to be a big deal.
Yeah.
And that's who you pick because you screwed up everybody else.
Left.
Yeah. You got rid of everybody else one way or another. You wrote yourself into a corner on that one. And again, Django Wexler did the best that he could with what he had and made, again, what should have been a pretty cool scene, a very brief aside, and turned it into something that's super frustrating.
Right.
I shouldn't have to think about that before going into this awesome fight scene in this great story, but I gotta read this little thing here where I sit there and I'm going, why is this what we're talking about right now? Why do I care? And obviously the answer is I don't.
Right.
But why am I supposed to care?
Right.
What are you trying to tell me I'm supposed to care about here? Because I don't see it.
Right.
So there was that. Then I had another question, and this one is just a question, because I don't know if it's good, bad, or somewhere in the middle. We then cut to Niv Mizzet, and we cut to Niv Mizzet's perspective, which, if I recall correctly, I could be wrong, but I believe this is the first time we are getting Niv Mizzet's solo perspective in this entire novel. Presumably also the last time we are getting it. But is that okay? We have clearly had Raul, Veraska, Kaya as like our main characters in this story throughout, right? Bolus being the main antagonist, and then you have secondary characters in like the Aurelias of the world and the Dovins and the Lavinias. Mm-hmm. But we don't get their perspective, like the omnipotent perspective from them, where we're hearing what they're thinking and they're kind of talking to us almost, or we're hearing their thoughts. But we get that with Niv Mizzet here. Now, does it make sense? Yes, because as I'll talk about in a bit, having like Raul be on Niv Mizzet's back for this whole fight so we could hear what was going on doesn't make sense.
No.
It would not have made sense. So you needed it to be from either Niv or Nicol Bolas's perspective, and having it from Bolas's perspective here probably would not have been great, because there were a couple of moments like the black ball of death at the end where like that would not have been as suspenseful as it was if it were from Bolas's perspective, because it would have just been like, oh, he's trying to do this now, okay, I'll float up and be fine. But instead we're treated to like, I did this and it's all of this falling down the hole and he can't get out now, and then there's a black ball that's rising up and the black ball explodes and he's inside of it. Like, that's so cool of a suspenseful moment of the fight, of like that half a second of like, ooh, not even necessarily he won, but like, wow, he really got in some good damage. Bolus is bleeding from the gash in his chest and the lightning attack and all these other things. Like, if it's from Bolus's perspective, Bolus might have easily been like, oh, that tickled. And then it's like, well, then what's the point of us hearing this, right? Like, you would have, I feel like it would have taken away a lot of the impact.
Obviously.
So, it's important that it was from Niv's perspective. But my question to you all is, and to you as well, Amy, if you feel like answering, does that make sense? Does it make sense that we are hearing from Niv Mizzet only now? Should there have been some prior moments from Niv Mizzet's perspective as even like a secondary main character whom we'd heard from prior to now, similar to what Greg Weisman did in War of the Spark Ravnica with Dak Faden, where you didn't need Dak Faden's perspective as often as we had it, but it then made sense when you got his perspective as he then died. So, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a bright line black and white, like one way works, the other way doesn't. I'm just curious of people's opinions, because I feel like it was okay.
I was going to say, I don't think that that's necessary. Would it have been nice for people who are in particular fans of Niv Mizzet? Perhaps. Kind of like the Dak Faden thing that you just referenced. But the way that this story was written, I think lends itself to the fact that we didn't really need more instances in the past of interactions from him to get a nice, well-rounded feeling of the character that he is in this moment in time.
And I think it contrasts with something else or compares to something else that I wanted to talk about, that I agree with you. I think I lean more towards that as well. I just wanted to present the question as a question because I think it's an interesting comparison to draw, is, you know, Niv Mizzet being this being the only time that we hear from him versus Dak Faden having a pretty big part in the novel because they wanted his death moment to be more impactful later on. And was that as necessary, or should it have been given to should his chapters have been given to other people to have given better characterization, or something to that effect, that where it was lacking? Like, would that have been where you made that up? But
I think that they just didn't want to piss people off in just killing him without any sort of character beats prior to killing him off.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair.
Which is what I feel like a lot of people felt with the whole Domri raid thing.
That's fair. Well, yeah, because we saw, like, you know, a couple paragraphs from him and then he was just gone. So yeah, that's fair. I mean, to be fair as well, some people might argue the same for Niv Mizzet, that he got this one chapter, albeit pretty badass chapter.
Right.
But he got this one chapter, a couple of moments of talking to Ral, and then he was gone. And we didn't even know that he was dead in the cards, unless you looked at the picture on Rising Populace, where somebody was holding up the picture of Niv Mizzet, you know, saying that he had died. And that was the way that we found out prior to reading the novel, where they then mention it in the novel because it was released before this, which is where we were supposed to have found it out.
Well, and there's still, what, 2 more stories for us to read?
2 more chapters. This is 18 of 20.
For us to read. So that's plenty of time for them to do and or say something to kind of show how Ravnica feels about Niv Mizzet at this point.
Possibly. I mean, don't forget, they do have the whole, like, resurrection angle in the novel, so they gave him that, at least. So maybe that's where they do it, if they don't do it here, because again, we have not yet read 19 and 20. It is available to us to read, and we'll be doing it very soon, but, you know, when we get there, we will find out. So, but I think this being from Niv's perspective can kind of correlate to something else I wanted to point out. I thought it was really interesting that at the beginning of the fight, or near the beginning of the fight, Niv mentions on his way to go to Nicol Bolas, kind of mentions to himself that the individual denizens of Ravnica, right, the individual people that live on Ravnica, were unconcerning to Niv as being who he is, because he is who he is. He's a 15,000-year-old Parun dragon, and Sally on the corner getting hit with a piece of falling debris is not his concern.
Right.
It's not. Because in the grand scheme of things, protecting the plane is much more important. Protecting the entirety of the city from this invading force is more important. And that in and of itself would have probably been enough, right? It makes sense of Niv being like, I just don't care. And that works really well when you're talking about pop culture references, for example. You have the whole Batman versus Superman story, where Batman got upset with Superman because Superman, with his godlike abilities in fighting who he was fighting, just didn't give a damn about the people in the city when they're smashing through buildings and there's rubble and debris falling everywhere and people are being injured and displaced and hurt. And Batman, aka at that time Bruce Wayne, is going through the streets helping people and looking up and being like, what is this guy doing? Like, he's ruining everything and he's hurting people in you know, his titanic god battle.
Right. People are being harmed and the entirety of the city is being destroyed.
Right. And that was that's also kind of something that's been said about the Marvel movies with the Avengers kind of big scale things as well, is that, like, you know, until
they touched on that in the Incredibles and
yes, but until like Civil War in the Marvel movies, it wasn't really talked about that, oh, you're just destroying New York City. Like, sure, it shows people here and there, but you know how many people are dead? You know how much money it's going to cost to fix all that like damaged stuff? And like, who's going to pay for all that? Does insurance cover it? How does that? So like that's one thing. But they did a very good job in this story of being like, you know, Niv Mizzet, the good guy in this instance, trying to save Ravnica as a whole, flat out says and explains it away by being like, I don't care about the individuals. Unless it's something that passes before me and is relevant, it doesn't, the individual people don't matter. And there are a couple of times during the fight where you hear like there's screaming happening, but Niv is never concerned. And I appreciated that they gave us that hook in the beginning of the fight of Niv being like, the individuals don't matter to me, and then they followed through by vaguely touching on the fact, like reminding you like, oh yeah, there are people here, right? Like, it doesn't talk about a building falls and I see a woman get crushed. That individual person doesn't matter to Niv. So even though it almost certainly happened a million times during that fight, Niv never mentions it in his own mind. He never mentions that he notices it because he told us beforehand that it didn't matter.
But at the same time, they're talking about the sounds because he still has senses, right? So he's listening, he's trying to drown out the sounds of screaming and crushing, trying to listen for his opponent.
Yep. Yeah, when he drops an entire city block on Nicol Bolas. I wonder how many people happen to be in a city block radius of this dragon fight. But it doesn't matter. Because the whole point was Niv felt that he needed to do it to give him any kind of an edge over the undefeatable, you know, Nicol Bolas, or the extremely powerful Nicol Bolas. And so I think, to tie it back into how we got onto this portion of the discussion.
Because I forgot.
Sorry. That may also be why this is the first time we're hearing from Niv, because before now, it has been about the individual people of Ravnica. Sure, that individual person may be Ral Zarek or Varaska or Kaya, who have ridiculous powers and are pretty influential in the running and the day-to-day of the plane in general, but it's still individual people. And so...
Well, and the point is that the reason for this fight and why it's important is to protect the people as a whole.
Correct. Collectively.
Because he's not fighting Nicol Bolas just so that he can control the plane instead of Nicol Bolas. He's fighting Nicol Bolas to keep Nicol Bolas from killing a bunch of people and or lording over them very evilly.
Yeah.
If not killing them.
Yeah.
So, you know, enslaving them perhaps or whatever. So he is looking at the big picture. He is okay with, you know, the casualties of war.
Yeah.
For the sake of protecting the populace overall. And
I will say, though, again, to tie this discussion into the next thing that I had written down, it contrasts with the novel, the War of the Spark Ravnica novel, where the Planeswalkers...
individualized.
Well, but the Planeswalkers had a plan in the beginning of, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to stop him, and then the army comes in, and they immediately 180, and they're like, we have to go save the people.
Yeah.
They're saving individuals instead of, and or just delaying going after Bolas. And we said that the whole time we were reading.
Yeah,
we
were like,
what does it matter? Stop Bolas and you stop the army. Like, what? Who cares about not who cares, but the individual people, yeah, they might die. But go stop the big godlike guy who, if you do end up stopping his entire army before he starts stealing all your sparks and becoming a god, he's just going to wipe out whoever the hell he wants to when he has godlike powers.
Yeah.
And so it goes to what Amy and I talked about again after this story. First of all, Amy, you had a point that you thought was kind of interesting, or there was one moment where you thought Niv was kind of dumb. Do you remember?
No.
Right here.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, okay. I kind of went back on that a little bit.
Oh, okay.
Because I sat there and said, why does Niv think that he has a chance against Nicol Bolas? Because I really thought that was stupid. And then I was like, well, but you know what? We have the benefit as the audience of knowing where he's been and what he's been up to.
He being Nicol Bolas.
So Niv Mizzet hasn't spoken to this guy in forever. On purpose.
If at all. I
Right.
don't know that they'd ever met before now.
Oh.
I don't recall. I
Okay.
mean, I think Bolas knows about Niv just because it's a powerful dragon on a plane, and I'm sure Nicol Bolas makes himself aware of those kinds of things.
Well, I mean, Niv Mizzet was very aware of the fact that Nicol Bolas was coming.
That might have been from Rawl and Veraska and Kyra.
Oh, okay. Well, regardless.
I may be missing something, but that's how I read it. But
we have the benefit as the audience of knowing what's been up with Nicol Bolas, and Niv really has not had that.
Mm-hmm.
So there truly is a kernel of realistic truth to the fact that he would think that he would be a good match for him.
Yeah,
And
that's fair.
and honestly, truly, after reading this story, he was.
Arguably.
He was a almost comparable match.
Well, again, let's not forget, as I said, it's definitely possible that if we got the other side of this fight, if we got in Nicol Bolas's head instead of Niv's, it's possible that gash in his chest was not anything to him. Like, sure, he was bleeding, but Niv Mizzet was bleeding too, and it didn't mention that he was in pain. It just mentioned that he was bleeding. It mentioned that his frills on one side were all shredded. It didn't mention pain once. Right. It was just Niv then eventually was like, I don't think I have a chance here. Like,
right.
You know, but it wasn't painful that he was bleeding. It wasn't painful that his frills had been shredded. It was just, and the death magic was going over his scales. Like,
well, and as you said, just because, well, it wasn't in the story, but that doesn't mean that they weren't experiencing pain.
True.
It just means that we weren't told.
Very true. Yeah. So both in both ways that works. Something
just like when you watch a Wolverine movie and he's healing himself,
it hurts.
He's still in a lot of pain,
oh, yeah.
even though they're not sitting there saying, "Oh, this hurts so much." You know, he's continuing to do what he's trying to do while healing. And he's in a lot of pain, but he's trying to move past it because he's got stuff to do.
Because presumably he's always still in the middle of a fight, and
right.
still his life is being threatened. So
right.
if he took time to be like, owie, then, somebody could kill him. So,
right.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's fair. But I thought it was kind of cool to mirror it again back to the individual planeswalkers in the War of the Spark Ravnica novel deciding to completely change their plans and go back and save all the people, being different from Niv in this instance, just being like, I don't care about that one person over there. I care about all of the people everywhere, so I need to stop him to do it. I don't care about all the people that are in this city block that I'm dropping onto Nicol Bolas. I don't care about all the people that turn to dust when that black death ball comes up out of that hole from the Simic Combine.
Right.
It doesn't matter, because what matters is stopping this entity
right.
who is invading us. And because Niv, I wrote, was able to get his licks in, right? He was somewhat comparable at points. Because of that, all that showed to me as well was that Niv Mizzet, in this moment in the story, is more powerful than the entirety of the Gatewatch were at the end of Hour of Devastation when they came across Nicol Bolas. Because there were 5 of them, not one, 5 of them individually in different places doing different things, attacking him on different fronts.
All planeswalkers.
Right, and I don't just mean fronts like left, right, forward.
Right.
I mean mentally, death magic, fire,
right.
like elementals physically attacking him, invulnerability and slashing with Gideon. Like, all of those things combined together did nothing.
Right.
And Bolus was able to deal with all 5 of them almost at the same time, if not just like very quickly, like, okay, you and then you and then you, like, you know, it was very quick
guys,
and very
this
easy.
is real fun, but can we move on?
Right. And so, but in this instance, Niv Mizzet alone, with preparation, he had preparation, he knew he was coming, whereas...
Well, a little bit.
The Gatewatch kind of knew Bolus might be there, but they were kind of also dealing with a lot of other things going on Amonkhet at the time. So maybe it's not a perfect one-to-one comparison, but to me, all that I got from reading this was that Niv Mizzet himself, in this story, was a lot more powerful than all 5 members of the Gatewatch combined at the time that they faced Nicol Bolas during the Hour of Devastation.
Well, don't forget that Ajani tried to say, hey guys, you need a lot more time to prepare for this, and you're going to need a lot more help.
It's because he's pretty awesome.
And then they just went anyway.
I agree. They were very foolish. They were very foolish. And Ajani was not, because he's the best.
Not better than this.
So, yeah, welcome to JaAR, if you've never been here before. The last thing I wanted to bring up was a bit of a nitpick. So, possibly a bigger nitpick, but I want to make sure you didn't have anything else for this story.
I don't think so, yeah. We keep going off in so many random tangents that I think this video just needs to come to a close.
Well, again, welcome to JaAR.
Right,
but,
exactly.
So I wanted to read, I've done this a couple of times in these chapters. I wanted to read you all a passage from this particular chapter, and I'm going to read it word for word. I wrote it down as a quote, and I'm going to read it word for word, and I'm going to try to not stumble over it, despite the fact that when I read it out loud to the both of us, I stumbled over it easily like 6 times. And again, I'm not saying this to pat myself on the back or toot my own horn, but I'm a pretty good reader. So it's not like...
That is true.
So it's not like, you know,
That's
stumbling...
why I always make him read the stories. I don't want to.
Everybody has their own individual skills. You're the one who schools me on history all the time. So, and there are many times where things come up in these stories and you're like, yeah, it's this thing. Like this like cultural or artistic significant thing. And I'm like, okay, cool. Thanks for knowing
and
that.
And there's plenty of those things that I don't know. So anytime you guys want to school me in the comments, please do. Because I'm always itching to learn more about stuff like that.
It's true. So, allow me to read to you from this passage that I wrote down here. Not even Rakdos himself, Niv had always believed, would be up to if push truly came to shove, although of course it would be terribly inelegant to allow any such thing to ever come to pass. That is, first of all, one sentence, non-stop. There were no periods in there. I may have paused. There were commas, but no semicolons and no periods in that entire sentence. Second of all, Niv had always, not even Rakdos himself, Niv had always believed, would be up to if push truly came to shove. There's a word missing there. And at the end, would be terribly inelegant to allow any such thing to ever come to pass. Clearly, that is supposed to be the word ever, to ever come to pass.
And realistically, you're talking about the fact that it's one sentence and it ought to be more. Realistically speaking, there's so much there, but it's really only a portion of a sentence. Mm-hmm. The idea is still incomplete.
Mm-hmm. And I bring this up again for a very particular reason. And it is not to say anything negative about Django Wexler. Because Django Wexler, if you are unaware, is a human being.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Not a dragon.
Yeah, I don't know the man personally. I have seen him on Twitter talking about things.
So we know he's not a dragon.
Because how would he work the buttons?
I know, right?
But
you'd have to use the dragon software.
That's a very okay. You can stop. That's a very pointed joke that
yes,
I do not think lots of people will get. I barely get it, but I'm like 50%
It's a software where you talk to your computer and it writes things for you.
Speech to text.
Yeah.
Good old speech to text. That was not allowed at my school, my law school.
Okay.
You were not allowed to have that on your computer. It was not allowed.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it was told to us. It was a policy of the school.
Oh.
Very interesting. I have no opinions one way or the other. I can totally see why professors would not want that to be the case, because they would see a student like sitting back in their chair and like their computer was just writing everything the professor was saying if they were like lecturing. I think that's kind of cool, but I can understand why they wouldn't want it. That is a huge digression.
Right.
But
and that's somewhat obsolete in this point in time.
Yeah.
But
my point is that it's to say nothing about Django Wexler, because he's, as I said, he's a human being. So when I write things, I have spelling mistakes, I have grammar mistakes, and again, if you're writing, let's say in Microsoft Word, because that's probably I would say the most universally understood writing method, or even Google Docs or whatever method you use to write things in.
They're not. You just use a pen and paper.
Yeah.
Like me.
But spell check type programs are not going to tell you that those two errors are in that paragraph, that sentence. I'm sorry, it's not a paragraph at all. It is a sentence. It's not going to tell you that those two errors are there. Because
but it would if you got Grammarly.
Hashtag not spawn. But, hit us up, I guess.
Advertised to constantly.
I've seen so many Grammarly advertisements.
Oh, man.
Grammarly, I don't care, but I would love to, if you want to hit us up, I'd be more than happy to be a sponsor for you. Because then I'd be happy to test out your program and talk to as many people about it as you would like. I will give my honest opinion, though. That's just how I do.
Unfortunately for you.
Not necessarily. Who knows? I have no idea. I genuinely don't know. But those would not be picked up by a regular spell check program.
Correct.
You know what they would be picked up by? A second set of human eyeballs. Because I just read that sentence to you. Is there anybody out there? I read each part twice, each problematic part twice.
No.
Is there anybody out there, the first time that I read it, where you didn't hear something wrong with it, even if you weren't able to specifically say, oh, the word every doesn't go there, it should be ever, you probably heard it and you were like, wait, what? That doesn't make sense. Right. Say that again. And that, in and of itself, just the wait, say that again, is enough to trigger you read it again, find out where the problem is, add the extra missing word in, and or remove the Y at the end of every to make it ever like it's supposed to be.
Or preferably add the piece of the sentence that is missing as well.
Right. That I think is secondary. The obvious things.
Primary.
That's fair. That's fair.
That's a preference thing, I suppose.
I would agree with you. It's somewhat primary. It's just, I think at its base level, I could have a 13-year-old read this sentence, a 12-year-old, a 10-year-old, who has taken very minimal English lit classes, English classes in general, language courses, that would be able to read that and tell you that it was wrong. They wouldn't necessarily fully be able to mechanically explain why grammatically it's incomplete.
Right, or what would need to happen to it in order to fix it.
But they could underline that in red pen and say confusing, or circle the Y in every and say, it should be ever, or circle the space and say there's a missing word here. My point is, in bringing it up in the first place, again, because I'm not doing this to badmouth Django Wexler, if you are writing something for a company that is then going to put that work out there to the public, that company would presumably check your work.
Right.
Because they being Wizards of the Coast, they have employees who need to check and make sure that the characters are being represented correctly. Right? Not to say, again, this is an example and not to reference any writer or author at all, but if an author were to, let's say, have Chandra and Nissa begin to be romantically linked with one another in some way, as people have alluded to and believed, but that's not the direction that the company would like to go, the company is going to contact that author back and say, I'm sorry, but you need to be less overt about your relationship, the relationship here that you're writing about, because we're not comfortable doing that. that means that someone is reading it.
Right.
Hopefully more than one someone
right.
is reading it.
Or at the very least, if they don't want to get that technical about it, someone should be reading it simply to just make sure that they've done what they've been asked to do.
Correct. Correct.
You're paying them to perform a service for you as a company. You're paying them. You should probably check and make sure that they've done what you've asked.
Right. And
did they write the story? And is it about who it's supposed to be about? And did the things that are supposed to happen in it?
Yeah.
Because
in the order that they're supposed to happen.
Otherwise, he could have just submitted a story about, whatever random thing is next to him in the room that he felt like writing about.
And again, there's the story team itself. There are continuity people who look through this to make sure that it works with the continuity of prior stories as well as if they know about future stories.
There should be people doing that. I don't know if there is.
Okay, I do know that.
Okay, but are they doing it? Is what I'm saying.
Well, I will say we have not had to discuss big continuity issues since
the novel.
Since like Dominaria, I felt like. Again, there are retcons, that's one thing. That's blatant and purposeful.
Okay, you're right.
I'm talking about in Dominaria where they just blatantly gave absolutely incorrect information out and just put it forth like it made sense, not trying to retcon anything, but just being like, oh yeah, this is what happened.
Just seemingly completely unfamiliar with the material.
Yeah. So, since then, they have had, at least on paper, they've had a continuity person who's gone through it. Regardless, any person, anyone who read this story, either just this chapter or the whole novel, would have been able to find that issue. And it's something that I have said for years on this show. And I'll tell you why. I haven't said this in a while, so if you've heard it before, I apologize. But I think it's worth talking about briefly. There is a director that Amy and I had when we were in theater in high school. And he said something that I will never forget. Someone that we greatly respect and love because he's amazing. Something that I will never forget, and even my mother, who had spoken to him in picking me up from events and things like that, she says this often as well, as we then are now patrons of theater, whether it is, in New York City and Broadway or what have you. If I am in a theater and I'm sitting down in a room and I am taking in the show, I want to be absorbed into that show. I want to know that character down there is Alexander Hamilton, not, let's say, Lin-Manuel Miranda. I don't want to know that that's Lin-Manuel Miranda. I want to know that that is Alexander Hamilton. I want to know that that dancer who's coming out is doing so to frame the scene and be a part of the scene. I don't want to see the stagehand coming out and catching a set piece that rolled away from them or something, and they're just blatantly in the spotlight pulling it away, because what does that do? It takes me out of the experience. I'm now aware that I'm watching a play. I'm aware that I'm sitting in my seat. I'm aware of the person next to me or behind me or someone coughing or what have you. Again, hence why you don't want cell phones going off during performances, because it takes you out of the experience. And so when I'm reading a story, I want to picture Niv Mizzet and Nicol Bolas flying through Ravnica, destroying the city.
Right.
I don't want to have to stop in the middle of the story and go,
what was that sentence?
What word is missing here? Oh, wow, they added the Y on the end of the word ever. Because now I'm aware that it's words on a page.
Right.
It's not a retelling of a story that I can picture in my head. I'm taken out of the experience. And that is a gigantic... I'm somewhat stealing this from Amy, so please feel free to expand on this after I say it. Okay. It is a huge disservice to the work, the good job that Django Wexler is doing to take me out of that experience in what is such a good chapter.
Well, and it's a disservice to us as the Vorthos community, because it's just yet another way that Wizards proves to us as the Vorthos community that we are less important to them as the other members of the Magic community that spend more money or whatever.
And it's, I will give credit where credit is due. If that were the only thing, just that one paragraph and or occasional misspellings or omissions or bad grammar, I would not personally draw the conclusion of, oh, it's another example that they don't care, because it's a silly thing, but it's important to us for the reasons that I just stated.
Right.
But it's still, in the grand scheme of things, I think it would be unfair.
Not that big of a deal.
Right, I think it would be unfair to turn around and be like, well, Wizards clearly doesn't care. Like,
right.
That would be rude, right? To just put that on them.
Make that assumption
right.
From that one instance.
But in this story alone, I already talked about the fact that it seems like the story team is attempting to retcon what was done previously for some unknown reason.
Even though it was the best stories in existence, in our opinions, really.
Right, and especially in the lead up to this big finale,
right.
You would think that would be the case. And I actually saw some discussion today, and I'm not going to get too much into it because I know, first of all, it's a hot button topic for my co-host here. But also, again, that's not to say that you're wrong in that.
Right,
It's just,
right.
This is not what we're here to talk about, really.
Right.
But I saw further discussion today because they were advertising the War of the Spark Forsaken novel and giving another...
Oh, they were actually advertising it.
Well,
wow.
I mean, it was tweeted about 2 weeks ago, I think, and today, to let us...
So they didn't, you're not saying they had like an advertising budget, they just tweeted something about
It was a gif of Liliana from the War of the Spark trailer,
Okay.
Along with a quote from the new upcoming novel, and then if you were to look at the replies to that tweet, it was full of people shitting on it, which... I am not here to say one way or another whether those people are right to do those things or not right to do those things, because
Well, and it's not your responsibility to say one way or another whether they are or not.
but there are many people who are upset. Again, my co-host as well, and you've seen that in past episodes, that Liliana is the person they are going with going forward.
Right.
We talked about that either last week or 2 weeks ago, where I mentioned that, of course it was, because she looks good in a corset or a tight outfit, as opposed to the Medusa woman, who would not be, it would not be as easy to draw her as an attractive character that draws eyes to it and makes people want to buy things of them. My opinion, and I genuinely may be oversimplifying it, but
I think there's a lot more of a complexity to that, but again, we're not here to talk about that.
we
so-
will get there, I'm sure, because as a reminder, and now to close out this video, as Amy mentioned like 20 minutes ago, we probably should have started doing. So I apologize for rambling on.
Don't apologize to me, apologize to them.
I apologize for rambling on.
We both do.
But this was chapter 18. Next week is 19, the week after is 20. And yet next week is when the novel is supposed to be released. To my knowledge, we pre-ordered the book a long time ago because it's been advertised to us for a while. So as long as our pre-order still goes through, and or as long as we actually did pre-order it like we think we did,
Right.
we will be getting that book soon. And we will start to read
Or as long
it.
as they actually follow through on what they've said they were going to
Well,
do.
this is a separate company, right?
Okay,
It's
good.
Del Rey Books putting this out. So,
Okay, so they'll probably...
well,
do what they're
it's
supposed to be
still
doing.
it's still a company. Like, it's still something where, if they mess up, we will have to contact them and check. But I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt. I believe I pre-ordered it. If it does not come within a time where I see most people who have said that they've pre-ordered it receiving it, I will check back through my emails and see if I have a receipt. And if
Some
so,
sort of a confirmation.
right, and if so, I will contact the appropriate individuals, and if not, I will go out and find the book. I will either order it and have it delivered or go to a bookstore and pick it up myself. But either way, that's way too nuts and bolts. But either way, we will then get that book, however we have to receive it. We will receive it, and we will read it in as timely a manner as is possible for us. And if it takes us longer than we expect, then we may need to delay JaAR until it is time for us to talk about it. And if that's the case, we will have other content on Thursdays. Don't you worry. I am staring right now at so much product that needs to be opened.
Yeah.
Holy crap.
Openings
Lots of stuff. But if we need to delay reviewing the War of the Spark Forsaken novel, and then post that the Wild Earth Quest novel, we will have other things. There is technically also a Planeswalker's Guide to Throne of Eldraine that was released.
Oh.
Surprisingly, and everyone was like, "This is great. You should keep doing it." And the person was like, "Hey, thanks." The person who wrote it was like, "Hey, thanks," and I was like, "Oh wow, this person doesn't get it. We just don't. That's just not a thing that we're getting." So we love it. One, because it's anything, but two, from what I've seen, it was good and people enjoyed it. So there's that as well. So either way, we will be back with another episode of JaAR next week and definitively the week after. And then after that, especially when it gets to that point, we will try to tell you what's going on. If you come back on a Thursday and it's not JaAR, but it is a product opening, just know that we'll be back with JaAR as soon as we can. But as we have promised, we will not be putting out JaARs unless we have something to talk about, because we're not going to try to manufacture it because it's bad. It's bad.
We've tried that. It didn't work well.
No, people were not happy, rightfully so.
Right.
So yeah.
Including us.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Well, looking back on it, it was not great. Yeah. So, it's something that you live and you learn, and it's something that we corrected immediately afterwards, and we won't do that again.
We have done.
Yeah. And here we are. So,
still kicking.
Right. And with Theros Beyond Death, who knows? I would love for there to be a story. I would love to not have to pay $4 for it.
Right.
But I will most likely be paying $4 for it.
Right.
One way or the other, if that is a thing that I'm being asked to do. But we shall see. That is far from now. So for now, I will say thank you all so very much for watching.
Yes.
We really hope that you enjoyed this episode. We make a lot of things for Geek for All as a whole.
Yes.
Right? Not just the Magic Channel, although if that is the only thing that you are interested in, you get 2 videos a week from us. Mondays and Thursdays. This past Monday, we are still continuing our Throne of Eldraine draft. It has been a blast, so I encourage you to check that out. It was a lot of fun. And then there's other stuff on our Video Games for All channel, where we release 2 videos a week. And...
Yes. And I now have a channel of my own, basically. That it's not really the two. It is a little bit the two of us, but it's mostly me. And it's a gluten-free channel. So it's kind of a completely different from the things that we've produced through Geek for All prior. But there are 2 videos up on that channel now. And I don't have a schedule yet of like when I'm going to be putting videos out. But there are 2 videos up there now. They are both Great Eldraine Bake Off, MTG videos that also kind of coincide with a gluten-free theme. But going forward, a majority of the videos on that channel will be gluten-free product reviews. And I might do some cooking sort of tutorials, or just kind of like trying things out. Like, oh, I saw this recipe, I wanted to see how it was going to go, or something like that. So if you're at all gluten-free, or you're thinking about going gluten-free, or lactose-free, because I am also lactose-free, and everything that I make for myself to eat or for the 2 of us to eat is gluten and lactose-free. So a lot of times vegan, but not always also. Please check out that channel. Or if you know anyone who has dietary restrictions, or, please pass the word along. Or if you're just looking for something to fill time and you're interested in our other channels, or you like our personalities enough that you'd like to see what other things we do, that is one of the new things that we do.
Yeah.
So it is gluten-free for all.
Still with the 4.
Right, because it's under the umbrella of Geek for All.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, there are 2 videos up now. I'm shortly going to be putting up a 3rd video of the sort of shopping trip that we did to prepare for the Great Algerine Bake Off contest, I guess it was considered, or yeah. So please check those out. Yeah, leave some comments. You know, just even if it's just to say, hey, you know, I'm coming from one of the other channels. You know, I wanted to check this out. You know, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. You all know how YouTube works. I will try my best to get gluten-free for all as well as video games for all little buttons here so that you can press those and subscribe to those channels. Go check them out. So you don't necessarily have to go looking for them. You will just be able to find them. And there will be videos here as well. If you want to click those, that would help us out. And of course, we think that you would really enjoy them. That's why we put them there.
Right.
So regardless of all of that, thank you all so very much for watching this episode. We really hope that you enjoyed it. Please leave any and all thoughts that you have about other channels, about today's stories, about our opinions on things in the comments down below, especially stuff about this story and our opinions regarding Vorthos type things. It's a really good way for you to join us and your fellow Vorthos, I almost had it, in showing off your...
Hashtag Vorthos Pride.
Rough. Anyway, thank you all. And apparently it's time for me to go because I can't talk anymore. So, for both of us here at Now the Geek for All family of channels, I have been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
And as we always say, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.